Welcome to Hive Mind Community podcast brought to you by TechSoup. Our podcast is a part of the digital activism program through which we provide the civil society with knowledge, tools, grants and networking opportunities so they can thrive. Welcome. In this episode, we will talk about self-care, community care in NGO work, stress and activism burnout. Today's guest is Natalia Sarata, a sociologist, social activist, anti-burnout trainer and facilitator involved in the NGO sector and social movements since 2002. She runs the RegenerAkcja Foundation for Tired Activists. I'm grateful to be here with you, Natalia.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I thought that we could start with the difficult, the overwhelming, the moment of crisis and overload, activism burnout. But let's start with the burnout in general. What are the symptoms of burnout and how does burnout differ from activism burnout that we observed in social movements and NGO sector?
I'll start from explaining that burnout is quite metaphorical name for a phenomenon like biological, neurological, psychological and emotional and also relational phenomenon that people experience from decades, maybe centuries. But nowadays it gets more and more pervasive in our societies, coming together with attention and stress and levels of stress that we need to endure. And another thing is that we have many different burnouts. As for medical discourse, there is an occupational burnout that is understood and known the most as the phenomena connected to the working space, to the workspace. But there are other names also for burnout in different spheres of lives. For example, activist burnout is one of them, but we also have parents burnout or carers burnout for those who take care of other people, not necessarily professionally. Adult children of their parents who are elderly and sick, they also can experience carers burnout, for example. There are many other ways and spheres that we can experience burnout. But as for what it is exactly, there is no one definition of burnout. I have some definitions to understand the process and the phenomena better. As I understand it, this is a process during which an individual living in this society experiences an amount, loads of pressure, of stress, of sense of urgency that make them feel overwhelmed, psychologically depleted, physiologically depleted, and unable to participate in communities and societies, not only in terms of work, but also in other aspects. And as for activist burnout, this is the very phenomenon that is experienced a lot in many activist communities that I get into and I work with. And what is characteristic for activist burnout is that activism is the kind of work on behalf of the world. It may not be maybe a professional work connected to making a living, for example, but it doesn't have to be, because you can be an activist and a professional NGO worker, for example. And what is quite important here is that activism and work in NGO sector is usually connected to strong values and beliefs and a sense of mission that is not always a very important part of occupational burnout. It may be, for example, for doctors or nurses or teachers or social workers and people that work in this kind of occupations that also share this kind of personal calling or personal mission in the world.
On behalf of the world, this is the phrase that you use that really resonates with me, and I think it explains perfectly what's the difference and why we talk about different types of burnout. And actually, thank you for explaining also the different types of burnout that are observed and taken care of in different groups. And should we consider activism burnout as an individual and social issues, and why? Because when the burnout starts, we are focused on individual, but could you share your experiences, your observation when it comes to the bigger picture on the social level, cultural, or maybe even political level as well?
The mainstream understanding of burnout is that the phenomena is individual. And usually, this approach is very common, that when a person comes to the, supervisor or fellow activists and say, dear friends or dear boss or whatever, I think I'm experiencing burnout. Then if colleagues or the collective or the group or the boss or supervisor are quite developed in their managerial and relational skills, they'd say, okay, so take a leave, a sick leave, for example, take care of yourself and then come back to us in a better shape. So this would be, and this is the main procedure. If the one experiencing burnout is, brave enough to state, to acknowledge and to come out as a person being in a state of burnout, because it's quite difficult to admit that, not only because of personal level and the level of shame, but also because there is a risk of losing jobs or losing the face of a proper activist. This is how it happens usually. It's still connected to this individualization of burnout as a phenomenon, that this is my fault, there's something I'm doing wrong, I'm not good enough in what I'm doing. And what is invisible in this approach is that burnout does not happen in a vacuum space. That there are many reasons that are exterior, that are coming from the outside, that make pressure on us and make us feeling burnt out. So this is individual phenomena because it happens in our bodies, in our nervous system, in our minds, in our cognitive functions, in how we understand the world and ourselves. In the same time, this is a result of these tensions and stressors that come from the outside. And many activists, many NGO workers that come to RegenerAkcja and ask for support or for understanding, for naming the phenomena, to make a test whether they are burnt out or not yet. They came across this kind of understanding that this is something wrong with them, and they are sent away from the organization to take care of themselves. But what is necessary to understand is that burnout is a social phenomena. This is a social thing, and it happens in the organization, in the collective, in the workplace. And these are workplace tensions, workplace stressors that make us feel burnt out. So this is both individual and societal or collective experience and a process. And we need to understand that, because not only we need to take care of ourselves, but also we need to be taken care of.
What factors in specific organizations, specific social movements that you, for example, worked with, push those activists to the overwork place, to the place of tiredness, and then to the activist burnout?
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's many of them, and
long list, I believe.
Yeah, a long list of it, but not to overwhelm our listeners. I'd say I would go for a big one. The social sector spaces are quite gendered. And as in the world, it's mostly seen as a women's role to take care of the world, take care of children, of the elderly, and of all of those in need. So it's visible in the education sector and in the social work sector and also in social movements. And also it's very visible in the big business, which is like full of also gendered individuals that are seen as better actors. I mean men, which is obviously not true, but because we are we need to live together. But there is this understanding that we should take care of separate spaces. So social sector, social work sector, social movements, and all of what is considered to be caring for the world, for others, is seen as women's work. So this is one thing that makes the sphere quite stressful, because this is only one gender, one sex that is seen as the one doing the work. So I'd say 95% of people coming to RegenerAkcja to ask for support or to understand the phenomena better are women, or women socialized people. And also when men come to the picture, usually these are men who are quite acknowledged or quite acquainted with the patriarchy. I mean, non-heterosexual men. So those who are considered to be less manly come to the picture, and it means that only some part of the world is considered to be obliged with taking care of the world. So this burden is unevenly distributed. This is one thing. Another thing is that there are many individual factors. For example, perfectionism, which is very connected to this capitalist notions of individualism, of being the best, of taking part in some kind of competition. So this is quite important. And being perfect, there's nothing wrong with it, but also perfectionism is not being perfect. Is this need for everything that I do to be 150% good, to be more than okay. And if it's not, if it's, for example, 100%, then I feel a deep shame, and I'm very anxious about that. So this is not about the results of my work, it's about my internal feelings. And this is my case, perfectionism, I really work on that. This is difficult because many of us were and have been trained to be perfect. And on the other hand, and it's again gendered, this necessity to say yes to everything or not to say no. And it's quite visible in the activist culture, which is also a quite important factor to activist burnout. In Poland, this is this mythology of being a messiah or the savior for the nation. It's quite nationalistic ideology, which is present in everyday life. The culture of sacrificing ourselves for the motherland. This is so important, and it's even if we are not following the model of sacrificing everything for the religion or for the God or for the nation or for the motherland, it's so present that many of us, I'm an activist myself, feel obliged to never say no and feel obliged to take care of everyone else apart from ourselves. And it is again connected to this difficulty with setting and keeping boundaries. And it's on the individual level, but also this is a social level. And again, there are some groups of people that are not very, raised to express anger and express their boundaries, especially girls and women. We are allowed to express sadness or joy, but it's difficult for many of us to experience and express anger and some kind of irritation. And this is the door to setting and keeping boundaries, to saying no. So you can see that these individual predispositions are intertwined with societal roles and constructions and these expectations that we get from culture. And obviously, it's also connected to this like broader culture, social and political sphere, being living in a communities or societies that aspire to a social change, or living in those communities and societies that are already there, or that are on the forefront of the social change. So we need to run to be better and better. And also this perspective of a climate catastrophe, of climate crisis, and many catastrophes. It's called even like polycatastrophe or polycatastrophes environment. It gives us a notion of urgency, and urgency is a very supremacy culture, white supremacy culture, that this is urgent and this is something that we need to do. So it's also a low tolerance for various explanations, for various understandings of the world. So this is quite intertwined in the activist culture. We need to do one thing only, and this is our strategy, that there is the best strategy. I could talk about it a lot, but I think there are many other questions or understandings that we want to ask for or talk about. So I would stop here for a while.
Thank you for drawing this picture, because you touch upon so many important cases for this like big problems that you touch upon, like the individual and like the social context. But you also started to talk more about, I would frame it as stereotypes or misconceptions of NGO, especially the context of gender as caregivers that are also related. And do you see any other stereotypes that are especially harmful for activist community? Let's call this broad and very various group, because there are variety of types of activism, different fields, makes different levels of urgency, as we have living in the poly-catastrophe that you just mentioned.
I do not want to say that things are not urgent. I believe they are. Another thing that, apart from this urgency, activism is working or being in social movements is something that should not be connected to payment or to money. There is a very profound understanding of activism as being separate from economical sphere in terms of like making a living, and that this is something ugly and this is something dirty to
the selling out that you can also hear from the activist community, that you sell out because you've got money from
because you work in an organization and not in a collective. I do not want to make these divisions and polarizations, because this is something that really gets in the way of us getting closer to our aims of the work. But there is this strong division that the real activist or real revolutionary is the one that changes the world, sacrificing themselves and also not taking money for it. But the thing is that we need to eat, we need to have a place to sleep, we need to rest, and these are obvious things, but not necessarily in the activist communities. And my work with activists is sometimes getting through this stereotypes of very polarized visions about who is the best activists and is burnout the badge of honor for doing everything that we can. And sometimes the burnout, which is a very difficult human experience, is considered to be this medal of gold, or my private joke is that this is a medal of made of potato, or other vegetable. This is something that breaks my heart, because if we start taking part in this competition, who is the best, and it means who is the most tired or shattered or burnt out, I do not want people to take part in this competition. And sometimes, in a very radical sense, it is understood as the best activism. And I'll make another parallel, that in this activism, this costs that we're paying, I paid it myself, unfortunately. So I know the place. This is something I really do not want for other people. But what's most important is that this is modeled as we would be in a military institution, not in activism, not in social movements, but in the military. So we fight, we have our barricades, we have our briefings, we have our strategies, we even have our masking clothes, and there's always a fight to win. We lose battles, and so on, so on. So again, trying to save the world from, for example, militarization, polarization, the radicalization, we land in the very same place when we treat activism and being engaged in NGOs, and sometimes we are, as it was a battlefield. So a very common understanding of NGO and NGO work is understanding it as a battlefield. And this is really something that make people not even try their best, but to do more than they can, because they and we are sacrificing ourselves for a better cause. And as for my message that I have for activists and people involved in this very important individual missions and callings, and being together in NGOs with other people with very similar callings, is that I believe this is the 24th article of the Human Rights Convention that says that rest is a human right. So if we try to work for the better world, where human rights are guaranteed and, accomplished, we need to remember about that. We cannot violate our own human rights in order to build a world where human rights of every human can flourish. So this is something I usually go to organizations, the human rights organizations, with this message. And sometimes it's shocking because this is so blunt, like, okay, but this is, you use this document, this international document, and you try to convince people that this is important, and try to be more consistent about that. So this is it. And of course, the thing is that the social sector, in opposition to industrial sector or the economic or entrepreneurship sector. The social sector bases on the social organizations, non-governmental organizations, and is not created for profit. So if it's not created for profit, the position of the whole sector in the world economy is different because it's not seen as the space for investment and for money as a profit. And the social profit is not seen profitable enough. And so it's like mirrored in payments, in wages, in people usually consider coming to some of the sector or enterprise sector or NGO sector, and they can see that the salary is totally different usually, unless this is not public sector teachers and nurses and so on. Yeah, so this lack of finance or scarcity in finance is also a very important thing. And scarcity in finance is being replaced with human work and human engagement. And sometimes it's not in a proper balance.
Thank you for this very strong and very visual metaphor when it comes to the military. I'm moved by that. This is very I think the visual one. And when you were sharing it, I kind of felt, okay, maybe let's go to the healing part of our talk. But I thought we have still some things to dig into to understand it better and to learn from this experience, because as you are sharing it with your experience with social movements, with NGOs, it is still a thing. And even that there are probably some changes, still the dilemma is quite big. And I wanted to ask you, does the activism burnout and other harmful activities or stereotypical things that are presented by some individuals or groups, of course, differ regarding representatives of minorities or people who are fighting for the minorities in terms of the potential intersectionality of the activism burnout? As you mentioned, gender and context of queer community as well, as those who are vulnerable. And especially those numbers are big. Like when you said a few minutes ago, 95% are mainly people identifying as women, is this is almost 100%. And this shows how the divisions and the gender stereotypes still are visible in this very open, including fighting for human rights community, which is call it broadly, third sector.
Yeah. These are people that come for support. And this is where gender actually works on behalf of women and girls, because we still are being raised in this understanding that we can ask for help. It's very difficult for men and people raised as men to ask for help because it means that they are not enough. So I can see this women and people socialized to be women. I can see this people coming for support as something that is really important, that this is something we can do for ourselves. But still, there are those activists that this is quite difficult for them to ask for support or to understand where they are, and that this is not a personal disaster or something that is a proof of them not being enough. So this is where gender actually works on behalf of women. I would say it through tears, that this is something I'm happy about through tears about that. It shouldn't work this way. Everybody should have an access to a support. And this is where society provides the opportunity to seek help. for one gender but not for another one. In terms of what was the question?
I was asking about the how burnout differ in terms of the minorities and the intersectionality. Exactly, that we have like this gender issue, but of course there are more of the things that comes to the intersectionality.
So I'd start from the naming the phenomena, which is quite important as we understand the position of minority groups or groups that are considered minorities, which is minority stress. And this is something that is experienced by people living in societies where, because of their individual identities and characteristics, they feel that they do not belong. And belonging is the very fundamental human need. And we as a species, as a human species, we could develop and be present and survive in the evolution because we are a social species. So when people in societies, because of their individual characteristics, such as their skin color or their sexual orientation or gender identity or disability, and so on, when they live under this understanding that they do not belong because the people like them are not visible in a society, or people like us, we experience this kind of minority stress. Trying to put it simply, this is experiencing that we do not belong, that we are different, and that either we adapt and we cut out the part of our identity, will not express it, or we will be expelled from the community. So it's not I'm saying it very bluntly. It's not so direct, but there is this unconscious notion. For example, I am not seeing people holding hands, people like me, holding hands in a public sphere. For example, two men holding hands. And I can see men and women holding hands. It means I'm not, with my sexual orientation being gay, as for example, as a man, I can see and I can understand that I do not belong here, or that this is risky to express part of myself, that it's not wanted here. So this is minority stress, for example. And as RegenerAkcja was conducting a social research on human rights activists belonging to minority groups, we would call it targeted groups or targeted identities, because this is not there are some people that are in a minority. There are groups that are a majority, for example, women, which are sociologically considered to be a minority. So it's not a quantitative, it's more of a qualitative factor. So many people with targeted identities, I mean targeted by the society or politicians or media, or this targeted in a socialization phase of our coming up to be citizens, for example, or adult human beings. These targeted groups, people from targeted groups, come to activism because this is their life. And this is the way to regain the sense of agency, the sense of influence. And this is a sphere that becomes very, very important. And in these communities, sometimes there is this notion that storytelling is the best strategy to engage people in human rights activism. Those are not from the minority, but from majority. They need to be engaged. And it happens usually through, for example, storytelling. I mean, storytelling as telling my story to engage others. And if this story is a story of victimization, of trauma, of being expelled and excluded, and I keep it like here in the open for everybody to see, sometimes it can be vindictive. Like, I do it for you to feel bad about it because you're guilty of that. And this is a personal, like, true for the person doing that. But for me, as for example, anti-discrimination educator, it was somehow necessary or important to be open about my own story as a non-heterosexual woman coming from a small village or city in south of Poland, from a very traditional space. So it would be very important for me to tell the story and to show an example, because individual stories work the best. And there is this expectation that, there is this person coming and should tell us her story. But still, I need to keep it like present, and the aggression I like experienced and the level of violence, or I was very lucky not to experience this violence against minorities a lot. But there are people in much more difficult conditions, and they are also expected, coming from like social movements, tell me your story, because only by hearing your story and only by seeing you humiliated again or re-victimizing you by me listening to your fascinating story of trauma. This is an irony and sarcasm. I'm sorry for that, because I do not want to offend anyone. But there is this expectations sometimes from those who want to be included, but they would need to hear the stories of trauma and humiliation to feel like engaged enough that there's something wrong with that attitude. What I'm trying to say is that approach of, for example, living libraries is quite controversial, and it's this is a tool of human rights education that bases on the personal experiences of a person coming from a targeted group and another person not having these experiences, being like lucky enough not being born with all these identities or within these communities that are targeted. This tool, this methodology is like the person with this many experiences, which are not only about victimization, obviously, can be like borrowed as a book and be read by these people coming from majority. And it bases on telling stories and answering questions and doing this kind of emotional work on behalf of people from majorities. And this is quite effective. But again, it bases on this understanding that this is my role as a person coming from this targeted community to tell the story, to engage people. So this is, and it's quite intersectional, because it's about being a majority living within, being a minority living within the broader majority. And what happens then sometimes, or quite usually, is a representation burnout. This is a phenomena where one person or person coming from a targeted group is expected to present themselves as a representation of the group. It's sometimes also called a token burnout. And it's a different situation where in a company or in an organization, there's only one woman, for example, to be a representative of all the women in the world, or all the women that can be part of our company. And so you would do the work of adapting our culture to a culture of respecting human rights, for example. So that would be on women. Or you are the only Black person in the room and you're becoming a representative of every non-white person in the world. And this is, or you are BIPOC academic in academia. So you would be called out to be part of committees, anti-racist committees or anti-discrimination bodies or institutions within academia, and usually this work is not paid for. So this is this representation burnout. Do this because you know it the best. Tell us the story because we want to know it, and help us or support us in dealing with that, but we have no money to do that. So this is it. And also, when working with these identities, with these stories, it's also being seen only as such. We have many identities and many stories, and telling one story and being seen only as a person with one certain characteristic in a workplace is very simplistic. So this is also the cost of being this representation of all the women in the organization, or all the Black people in the organization, or all people with disability in the organization. So this is difficult.
And from that part, with all of these dimensions and layers, I would propose to move to the healing part. First steps to spot, but mostly act with care to the burnout activism symptoms you would recommend.
First steps.
Yes, first steps to start the healing process. When you spot those symptoms, you know that something is going on. What would be the first tips for such individual who experience it?
First step would be to acknowledge that you have a body, that your body needs something, that your body needs to sleep and eat and needs water and so on and so on. And sometimes it's understood as something like something very obvious, but okay, so like give us something more. But this is a very long stop. We need to stay there for a long time, because living in this world usually omits the fact that we are people living in our bodies, and that we do the activism and we do our work with our bodies. Not with our heads and as in intellectual understanding, but with our heads as the very three dimensions head, where the brain is dehydrated, for example, and we cannot do the work because we are dehydrated in our brain. So this is it. And it's also very simple and very difficult. Having a body also means that we go to the toilet every now and then, and we do not wait for a better moment or to finish our email and then we can go. This is our body telling us that it needs to keep the fundamental functions. And also having our bodies means that we have this nervous system that need to be regulated. Not in the presence of our computers and our smartphones, but in the presence of other people. And being in a good, familiar, or friendly atmosphere with other people where our bodies can co-regulate. Because our bodies have this, or we have this wonderful characteristic that unintentionally, unconsciously, we can co-regulate with other bodies. With our brain waves, or the rhythm of our hearts, and skin temperature, with the rhythm of our breath, we co-regulate, and we need to seek spaces where it is allowed to rest, not only after work or after hours, but also in a good atmosphere. So the first steps to organizations would be not only on the individual level, to create such atmosphere at work or in activism or in social movements that people would not be drained by the urgency, the levels of stress, the tensions in other collective bodies in the movement, and to create spaces where people can feel safe and belonging. And when they can get this feeling of belonging in the organization, and belonging not only when they do their work as a perfectionist, but also when there's not enough time to do all the work that we have. And obviously we make mistakes and we do not meet deadlines and so on, because we are people. So creating the space where we feel that we belong in the working space, in the activist spaces, is something in a longer view, like in a broader view. It's creating also social movements that are already there in the future where everybody belongs. So this is something that is really our work, like internal work in social movements and organizations. It's not only about, indicators and KPIs. This is so corporate, and aims and budgets. It's also about belonging, especially in this non-governmental sector, in the social sector.
And would you describe it as an example of community care? Because this was also interesting for me, because we have this self-care a lot on the market as well, not only as a concept that is psychological and very physical, but would it be example or the basis of the community care, and how would you describe it and kind of recommend it to care also from this scope?
I understand community care as creating the atmosphere in a work that everybody belongs, and this sounds simple and it's very difficult. It's creating the atmosphere where we do not avoid conflicts, but we take care of conflicts, where we do not keep them or hide them, shove them under the carpet, and where we do not shove conflicts under the carpet. It's getting better and better in communicating, in interpersonal communication. It's also getting better at not only being very progressive and strategic with our aims and visionary, but also measuring whether our ambitions meet our capabilities. And sometimes scaling up is not the best thing. Sometimes scaling down the activities is the better one, because we cannot do, and nobody expects us or should not expect us to do it all. It's also to remember about money, which is a very important part of whether people feel belonging and celebrated and good about the work they do. And it also is about creating the spaces for influence, because social activism is an intergenerational work. Some of us would not see the effects of our work in our lifetime. It's like with climate, it's like with women's rights, it's like the queer people rights. We cannot see that coming, or we cannot. 120 or 130 years ago, I could not study. And now this happened because of my grandmother's work. And I can tell them I'm so happy and thank you for that. And our work, we are also ancestors to someone. And our work cannot be seen sometimes or within our own lifespan. So we need to remember about that we need to create all the spaces of influence that we can experience this influence. And it would be in the micro scale, but it's very important. So this is for the leaders of organizations. This is the calling to them to start thinking and to continue thinking about organizations as organisms that need to rest and need to engage and need to be seen and need to belong and need to crisis get solved, not omitted or denied. And we need to develop together, and we need to be individually and collectively cherished, although we may not understand our work as very successful. But the success is that we are here, or that we are still together, or that we still understand our community at work or in our NGO as very strong and effective in a sense of small steps. So the culture of organization is this sphere of community care. Obviously, a nap space or a hammock space or yoga classes or language classes or something like that. This is a good solution, but this is not the fundamental one. The fundamental thing would be to create a culture in which we are seen as people and not only as this small parts of a machine without our bodies, only with our strength. So I would say that this is the community care is about the organizational culture.
Would you like to add any other essential things about dimensions of care?
The very important experience that comes from workshops that I facilitate and support groups I keep is to make spaces for other people to be heard, to be listened to. I talk a lot here, and I'm curious about your insights. And this is very important to create a space where we can be listened to. I'm very thankful for you for keeping the space for me to be heard and to be listened to. And I'm very curious about your insights and what would you add?
Thank you. But looking at the time and the concept that we have, I would like change the atmosphere with a joke, because we gather here to listen you experts, individuals who are also helping a lot of people and hearing them. So we kind of like create this, and I would be thankful, and it would be great to talk about my insights after this. Smoothly moving to the end of our conversation, I would like to ask you to maybe share some advice on regeneration for activists from your experience. Could you give an example or maybe an exercise that we can do together at the end of this wonderful conversation?
There is one exercise I usually invite people to do together when we sit together in the room. It's the exercise that usually everybody can do. There are alternative versions of this short practice with your body. The one version is that you keep your one hand on your heart, somewhere on your chest, and another one on your belly, where the belly button is, and try to observe as your chest raises and expands when you're making and when you inhale, and how it drops down and gets smaller when you exhale. And we do a couple of times, trying to also feel the warmth of the palm of our hand on our chest or on our belly button. And you can also try to relax your belly. It really makes a lot of work to keep us standing, to keep us going, to keep us strong. And you can make a space for your belly to relax a bit and to open for breathing in, and also relaxing when breathing out. And I usually close a session with this practice, and I really love it. I'm getting more and more relaxed doing that. Maybe you can hear it in my voice. This is something that the practice I really love.
Thank you. Yes, I heard that your voice is a bit more relaxed, and thank you very much for this exercise. I think I'm a bit more relaxed as well. Thank you for this wonderful talk, all the insights and experience that you shared with us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
Looking for more resources in topics like countering disinformation, cybersecurity, personal and organizational resiliency, building positive narratives, or media literacy? visit the Hive Mind platform, an online hub with free content, tools, online courses, and ability to connect with digital activists across the globe. Embrace the power of community with Hive Mind.